All right. Today we are going to speak with Surendra Singh Sucharia, who's more popularly known in the digital trust community in India and abroad as Suren. He's been involved wearing many hats. He's been involved in very forward-looking projects, and he's been involved in projects that are scale. So he at DWay, while he's leading some of the exciting emerging initiatives that we are, I think Suren is very well placed to talk a bit about this idea of digital trust because 5 years back, digital trust was we could read it and hear about it uh, in forums, sometimes in op-eds, but it was not as mainstream a phrase as it is now. So it's almost like a journey of 5 years, and then something that was mostly talked about in nerd groups has suddenly become mainstream, and it's actually becoming front and center of many such initiatives. One thing, as an example, today when we are talking, the Union Government of India has announced the permanent account number, the PAN 2.0, where also digital trust is one of the things that has been highlighted. So we can see that it has moved. The needle has moved, so to speak. So Suren, talk to us a bit about digital trust, what it means, and how have you been seeing it as a concept?
Uh, you know, it has basically come from a concept to real life. Like, for example, the imagination of your face as your boarding pass is real at the airports, many domestic airports in India. The fact that we can trade and exchange value online and not just buy books from a retailer, but buy high value price products, that has become reality because we now place trust not just digitally, but also in some of the processes and guarantees that come through such business establishments, right? And uh, the fact that we can transfer money to anyone quickly, seamlessly. So the what has come through digital trust is from an idea that it can unlock a lot of value to actually transacting value, whether it is quotes that accept that work 24/7, to small retailer and shops and restaurants that operate businesses online, to your face becoming a boarding pass, and so on and so forth. So it has now started integrating into our lives, and we can all experience it in some way or the other as we go around doing our day-to-day things.
I'm going to circle back to this idea that you use the face as an biometric auth mechanism, and it's very evident when we are trying to use a system like Digi Yatra at the airports to be able to board access the airside facilities and board planes. One of the things that has happened is that in parallel with digital trust becoming so embedded in real life applications like you just described, there's also a lot of, uh, how do I call it, exploitation of the lack of knowledge around digital trust that is causing significant amount of harm. I mean, there's been scams, phishing, and a whole bunch of cybersecurity incidents all across. And these are not the large enterprise cybersecurity incidents. These are individuals who are getting attacked primarily because of this. So, uh, how do you see the idea of user managed data and identities being being a pivotal moment in terms of securing user data and also increasing the forms of digital literacy for people?
Right. So I think, as you rightly said, much of the misuse of this technology has been through social engineering, where people who are not well aware of how to trust a technology fall in the trap of some social engineering where they just mistakenly enter into a transaction which they should not be entering into, or they mistakenly trust somebody who is impersonating somebody else. Uh, and I believe it's a good point where product builders, people who are building applications for users, start putting more sort of designed workflows where it educates user to check a few things before they enter into transaction, because now as this digital technology or digital transformation starts flattening the landscape, many more people start participating in the economy. And it's important that product builders don't see it from the lens of users who are already transacting for many years, but rather see it from the lens of a user who has just picked up phone, has just picked up technology, may not very well read English on the screen, and so on. And the other part is I'm starting to see a lot of awareness videos and campaigns by the regulated authorities, by some of the sort of influencer creators on YouTube, trying to educate that how to enter into a transaction, what is a valid transaction, and so on. The third piece that I feel has been the missing layer and still continues to be a missing layer is getting some sort of legal entities validated in a transaction. Like we do have some snippets of it today where if you're trying to transfer money to somebody, you will see their account name as per what is on the bank records. But if you could do much more than that, where every person who issues, uh, as in is the originator of information, is recorded on some sort of legal entity framework, so that every time I try to look at the information that they produce at me, I can verify who they are. So something more like a public directory, which is more decentralized, so that every entity which is transacting is on this sort of decentralized public directory to for everyone to look up and validate, because the identity in the digital trust ecosystem is more about the keys with which you sign your data and transact. And much of the time, we don't even realize what these keys are. Like they're all managed by our devices, by our accounts, by the apps that we use. But for example, every transaction that you enter into is signed by your keys or your signature, which is digital in form. So how do we build this trust layer, which is missing in the internet and the larger digital landscape? Is the key question that I would like to sort of leave the users with, and then rather encourage the regulators to come and put out this information in a more machine readable format, so that these verifications are happening real time and not like I look up a PDF which gives me a list of valid actors in a certain ecosystem, and then I look up their public keys and then I cache the public keys. It's a very bad and sort of manual way to do it. But what if I could just ping and see who are the list of like valid actors right now, what are their keys, and validate a transaction in real time? That is this a valid transaction? Is this the valid information? Is this the valid document that I'm looking at? That would make a lot of sense. It would cut a lot of fake and frauds that we see in the market. Uh, and I think that's the way to go to build the trust layer of the internet.
You bring up 2 points, and I was planning to ask you about. One is the fact that you use the phrase accounts, digital accounts, and I think the domain that we are dealing with, digital accounts effectively kind of are also implying that you are having some sort of a secure storage like a digital wallet, which on which you have an account through which you are doing interactions across. So, which essentially means that if we think about how the progression of Web 1.0, 2.0, and Web 3.0 happened, it has transitioned to the fact that now it is really that there is an account and there's a wallet that happens. So it is a very it is the centerpiece of all this interaction, right? And you have been deeply examining product designs, product approaches that work at scale. And are there anything about a digital wallet or the paradigm that is being used for a wallet that you see that could do with a bit of improvement to make it far more easy for those who are not uh, heavily technology literate? Because let's face it, this is going to be consumed, used actively by millions and billions of people, not all of whom are very tech savvy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are the pieces
Yeah.
that you think could be sharpened up in terms of the wallet?
I think two things that come to my mind. One, of course, we have seen that an account can be operated on a smartphone with biometric security for somebody who is fully literate, has access to devices, and maybe more cutting edge flagship smartphones can do all that, right? Uh, People with lesser technology smartphones could still authenticate using a link, maybe enter some PIN or password, and people without a smartphone would at least authenticate using a SIM card, which is a phone number with an OTP. So at least a one-time password comes to you, and you are able to share it and authenticate against it. And the last bit is people without any sort of devices. And that is also a certain audience to consider, especially maybe senior citizens from very low resource family where they are less likely to even have a phone, forget smartphones, right? So we can't even assume a SIM card to which an OTP can come. And maybe they can authenticate using some form of biometric or certain information that they only know. Of course, when we think from inclusion lens, there is a certain set of people who may not even have all the biometrics, like somebody who may not have all the five fingers in the hand, may not have both the eyes, and so on and so forth. And for those cases, there are like inclusion methods to even include them into certain transactions. But I believe it's important, one, for any product builder, for any platform builder who is trying to build user-centric solutions where users are involved, to consider the full spectrum and build for each one. The other bit is educating the user that you are participating or you are a party to the transactions, and hence it is required for you to authorize it. Like many times, we are so used to the data freely flowing between two systems without the user consent or without any notification that comes to me, that if I just get an OTP, as in not me, but say if someone just gets an OTP, they are puzzled that, oh, why do you need an OTP? Or why do you need a password? Or why do you need me to do this? Like, don't you already know my data? Don't you already have it? So at least, and I'm not talking for the globe, but at least for India, uh, the trend has been that systems already talk to each other seamlessly without the consent of the user. Many product builders, platform builders have just taken that as the de facto. But I believe with the advent in the DPDP Act and the recent guidelines that are coming out, much of this is bound to change. The consent will be purpose-based. Privacy will be de facto and not like an afterthought or an exception. It will have to be privacy first, purpose-driven design, where you only disclose the information that you want to disclose for the sake of a certain purpose, and it is bound to expire at that moment. So I think the folks who build products, while they try to optimize for, of course, revenue and adoption and usage and low friction, customer onboarding, you'd also have to consider how to do all of that with compliance to privacy first, purpose driven consent mechanisms.
Yeah, I think there is a sweet spot. I believe there's a sweet spot that exists that it doesn't have to bypass some of these checks or guardrails, but it doesn't mean that the guardrails should be looked at in terms of like, oh, they're just adding friction to my adoption, so I better just remove and make
Yeah.
adoption very because they are there for a reason. They're called guardrails for a reason. I'm going to kind of slowly switch to a thing that I know you have been discussing widely. You mentioned this in a little bit earlier as well, which is you mentioned decentralized directories, and I know that you talk about decentralized directories, you talk about the decentralized directory protocol, and you also talk about open trust infrastructure as an important piece of all of this puzzle. Now, the thing that I want to understand is everything that you described until now has to rest on a layer of trust. There has to be some sort of scaled infrastructure that enables all of this high assurance transaction to happen, for consent to be recorded, data exchanges between systems to flow through. And I have heard you talk about open trust infrastructure as one of the necessary bits of design that needs to happen. So talk a little bit about the the protocol, the directories, as well as perhaps the open source infrastructure and how all of that fits in.
Right. So if I take an analogy, and this is going to be one of the many attempts that I do, because every time I explain this idea of open trust infrastructure and all of this, I try to come up with a new way to explain it to see if that works better than the others. Uh, so if I take an example of, let's say, none of the technology existed and we were transacting physically, which is me couriering something to you or me coming physically to give you something and you coming physically to give me something. And from that world to today, and when you try to break, like we are buying products online which are worth thousands or lakhs of rupees, we are investing in various instruments, each one guaranteeing a certain types of returns, and we just not even batting our eyes before even thinking that, oh, press the button to invest, right? Like, where is that money going? Where is the guarantee? And that's what something like a digital trust ecosystem enables, that it allows you to participate in economy much more actively, trans and it gives empowers us to have our documents in our hands so that we can present them where we want, not always go back to the issuer and get the original and get it signed and notarized, but rather just have it with us and present it when you want. Just print out or share it digitally. Uh, so what constitutes all of this is there is a transaction layer where you and I are meeting on a platform or on an interface. And now with uh, something like the backend protocol, or what is widely known in India as the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, it facilitates discovery and transaction workflow. But I believe parallel to that is a data exchange protocol and data exchange workflow that is required, where you and I can exchange documents in standard formats. You and I can exchange documents in certain standard protocols, using standard protocols, so that no matter which systems we use, you know what document to expect, you know how to verify it, you know how to accept each other, transact the document, which is what something like W3C, Verifiable Credential Standard, and the protocols from OpenID Foundation for credential issuance and credential presentation are all for the data exchange mechanism. And yet, what is missing is that how do you then trust the actors? How do you then prove that the issuer indeed who they claim to be? Like if it's a college certificate, how do you know the college is valid? Or if it's a GST and invoice, how do you know the company is valid? And so on. And hence, there is then a need for a trust infrastructure or a trust registry where these issuers and any sanction list against them, that are these the valid credentials, were they banned from certain type of transactions on a certain date, which means starting that day, all the transactions are considered invalid, and such trust elements need to be captured in a trust infra, which is what the decentralized directory protocol aims to solve for. And with these three in place, the deeper layers where the physical assets which we can't transact today and can't move between us, can they be tokenized and kept on an infrastructure which guarantees us that those assets will not be double spent, or they represent a real asset in the world, and they have the technological guarantees to move them from different states. Like say I have a property which I'm going to pledge to take a loan. Can that property have a state which is, today I hold it, tomorrow it is pledged, maybe the day after I sell it to you? Can that trust layer record all these status of the property with the right authorship, so that while the property can't move digitally, but the value that it controls or it depicts can be transacted online, right? So I believe the trust infrastructure hence comprises of these various layers of the transaction layer, the data exchange layer, a trust registry or a decentralized directory where you identify the valid actors as per the regulation, and a tokenization infrastructure that allows you to represent value digitally and hence put the technical guarantees on top to transact it freely. And then that tokenization infra can have much more in terms of smart contracts which are predetermined and neutrally hosted, so that we know what will happen if you execute this deal, and so on and so forth. So it can have all those layers. So I believe it's this whole layer from identity, which is represented on registry, to credentials, smart contracts, asset tokenization, and finally your data proofs that lie on the blockchain. So all of that, I believe, constitutes the trust infrastructure in various shapes and pieces that fills the puzzle of unlocking a lot of value that is trapped today in various shapes and forms in the market.
And I think it goes without saying that these are predominantly built using open standards, open source software, and to enable better adoption, also to enable others to innovate on these layers
Yes,
and remove the lock-in.
exactly. I think all of these, yeah, it goes without saying that it assumes a multi-party ecosystem, which means, and then every entity in the ecosystem can take different roles in different transactions. Like in a certain transaction, I can be issuing a document, but in another, I may be receiving a document. Or in certain transaction, I may be buying an asset for someone, I'm trying to sell an asset, and so on and so forth. So Hence, protocols that allow each party to play these different roles and transact with each other, where there are no predetermined rules or integrations that have happened only between two parties, but rather a dynamic, thriving ecosystem where everyone can transact with everyone as long as they wish to, from a logical and business sense, enter into that transaction. So the decision to transact should be more uh, a business and policy decision and not a technical decision that prevents you from transacting anyone, as long as we build on these interoperable specs and standards and protocols that allow us to just transact with each other. So yeah, very well said. Interoperability and open standards is a given for this uh, particular ecosystem to function and come together.
This was nice. I think this kind of sets up a base for us having next conversation in a separate setting around how products get built on open trust infrastructure and leverage some of the areas that you mentioned. Also keeping in mind some of your inputs in terms of product design. So before we
And
wrap this one up, any final thoughts or remarks that you want to have?
no, there is. I don't think there's anything like final thoughts and remarks. It's an open conversation. I would invite everyone who listens to this to join the community, to reach out to any one of us, and engage as we reimagine and reshape the digital future.
Thank you, Suren.
Thank you. Thanks, Sankarshan.